This is a climate manipulation experiment where we're altering the temperature and the precipitation patterns so that we can see how the plants and the soils and the biological soil crusts respond to those changes. We use infrared lamps to increase the temperature. So infrared energy comes down, warms the plants and the soils, and these plots are 4 degrees Celsius above ambient. They track natural temperature, so there's a computer brain that says, is that warmed plot warm enough compared to the plots that aren't warmed? And if it's not, then it turns on. So if this drops down to 3.9 degrees warmer than the control, the lamps turn on and it warms it back up. It's incredibly effective at consistently warming these plants and soils above ambient temperature. Biological soil crusts are a fantastic community of organisms, lots of symbioses, and so we have the lichens, which are an algal and fungal partner living together, and the lichens are really beautiful, lots of pinks and greens and yellows, lots of colors, and they play very important roles in stabilizing soil, adding fertility to that soil. We also have a lot of mosses, which are actually plants, non-vascular plants, and they're the kind of fuzzy green organisms, also stabilizing soils and adding fertility. And then the cyanobacteria, which we often forget about because they're harder to see on the landscape, but they're providing that glue in the mineral soil, holding things together. But you can see this cyanobacterial crust forming these little mountain ranges there, and this is really stabilizing soils. These cyanobacteria produce this sticky glue that they put into the mineral soil, and then it stabilizes things. So one of the questions we're asking is, could the changes in climate affect these organisms and their ability to stabilize soils? They're really taking up lots of carbon in that winter time and photosynthesizing, whereas the summer, when they get wet, it's more of a stressful activity relative to winter. Warming in wintertime could have disproportionately large effects on them compared to summer warming. We're watching the recovery of that biological soil crust with and without warming. We're seeing some patterns that are really interesting. One of the species that we're focused on here at these sites is Indian ricegrass. Indian ricegrass is a really important forage species for wildlife and livestock. So trying to understand how that species might respond to something like warming, and what options we might have for maintaining the species on the landscape. When precipitation falls naturally, some of it is intercepted by these panels and drains off plot. And so here the plants and the soils underneath are receiving 35% less precipitation than they would otherwise. Even without changes to precipitation, warming would dry, create more aridity, but at the same time there could be these changes in precipitation. We were trying to do our best to create conditions that will help us understand how these ecosystems will respond to change, in the hopes that we can provide information that could inform management options for helping to maintain the communities and the functions that are so important to us. It's a really exciting time to be studying these types of issues, but we really need to work together because there's so many important questions and they're complicated. No single person could handle it alone. Changes to the ecosystem caused by climate change could actually in turn create feedbacks to climate change. So we're really interested in understanding how carbon comes into these ecosystems through photosynthesis and how it leaves through respiration. So the plants obviously perform photosynthesis, taking up carbon dioxide to the atmosphere and turning it into their biomass. The biological soil crusts do the same thing. We're really trying to use these plots as a way to create improved carbon budgets, both in the current climate and what we expect from future climate. If ecosystems like this one take up more carbon or less carbon with an altered climate, it could have really big implications for how much carbon dioxide is in our atmosphere, which of course determines the climate. Increased frequency and severity of drought is something that we're really concerned about here. And if we can continue to improve those forecasts, it offers a lot of opportunities to resource managers in the Park Service and BLM, other agencies, to try to plan for maybe a good year when restoration efforts could be more successful, or a challenging year when they're trying to mitigate certain problems. example, the Park Service Inventory and Monitoring Program has an incredible record across lots of different ecosystem types in the Southwest. How are plant communities shifting with time? One of the things that I think is so exciting about science and the science of climate change right now is the many tools that we use to try to understand these complex processes. Things like tree rings, atmospheric chemistry, looking at experimental plots and observational data. There's so many different lenses that we're using so that we can try to distill some of the incredible complexity of these ecosystems and our climate system. And so a big question for us is, how will the composition of the community shift? What could we expect for grasses versus shrubs? And so these long-term experiments offer so much opportunity, the same way we were talking about tree ring data. Of course, these don't go back thousands of years, but to see that change through time, that really informs the larger pattern and its driver.